So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar of our series of webinars about the Living Co-Creation workshops. So, for those of you who have already listened to us before, this information might not be new and you might have already heard about it. But for the new listeners, I would like to introduce you to our project, Living Innovation, to give some context to this webinar. So Livin is an initiative that was started by 14 partners from all over Europe, and that includes major industry leaders, civil society, and research organizations. Together, we have joined forces to co-create more responsible approaches to innovation in the areas of smart homes and smart health. So within the Livin project, 20 co-creation workshops will take place and are already taking place in 5 European countries in 2019 and 2020. So as said, those workshops have already started this year, and their aim is to engage industry representatives with lead users and citizens in a co-creation process. The goal of these workshops is to develop new solutions or to improve existing solutions together so that these solutions would satisfy at the same time the user needs, would tackle societal challenges, and create new business opportunities. If you're interested in our project and you wish to know more about it, you can find more information about it on our website and take part if you wish on www.living-innovation.net. The webinar today presents the results of one of these co-creation workshops that was led by Siemens in September. More specifically, it was the Siemens Accessibility Competence Center that carried out the workshop. That workshop aimed at co-designing and co-creating with blind and visually impaired persons the user interface of an amateur radio device. And this webinar today, Co-creating with and for visually impaired persons, present the result of that workshop. I will now introduce the speakers of today's webinar, Klaus-Peter Wege and Bianca Lau. Klaus-Peter Wege has been working for Siemens for more than 20 years as principal consultant with special focus on accessibility. Together with his team, they have been involved in various accessibility-related commercial and European research projects. As the head of the Siemens Accessibility Competence Center, he is responsible for the Siemens Accessibility Initiative, a corporate Siemens-wide joint effort to improve the accessibility of their various products and services. He's also active in the accessibility-related standardization at the international and European standardization bodies, and he chairs the German Standards Committee, Accessibility at German Institute for Standardization. Bianca Lau has been working at Siemens in the Accessibility Competence Center with Klaus-Peter since 2014. She provides assistance with evaluations of accessibility, with user tests and research and development. There's some noises. All right. Before we start, I would just like to make you aware that the webinar is being recorded and it will be sent out to you in the coming weeks. If you have any issues with audio or video during the webinar, please make sure to let us know using the chat box, and a member of our team will come back to you as soon as possible. At the end of the webinar, we will have some time for Q&A for attendees, so please feel free to ask questions using that same chat box or by using our email address info@living-innovation.net. However, you're also welcome to use your microphones and ask your questions directly to our experts at the end of their presentations, so don't be shy. So with that, I'm going to pass on to Klaus and Bianca. Welcome to you both.
Good afternoon, everybody, and Teresa, thanks for the kind introduction. This is Klaus.
And I'm Bianca. Hello.
And we just want to give you some ideas on our workshop on accessibility with visually impaired and blind persons. The interest of Siemens in the Living Innovation project is to try out how co-creation may work with older persons or persons and disabilities. Therefore, we made some experiments, I would say, in form of these workshops, where we selected several different user groups for these workshops. First, we tried a workshop, a dry run with students and project partners. Then we had a workshop which we reported earlier, with older senior people. And now we are reporting from a workshop which is very specific because we are addressing not only blind or visually impaired persons, but also very technical affine persons. And we hope to learn from them more about the relation of technology to the user needs of blind or visually impaired people. Last but not least, we are interested in how to co-create with persons with some cognitive or learning disabilities, but this will be next seminar, hopefully in 2 or 3 months. The topic of our lab, of our proposal is, of course, lifelong health and lifelong living, and of course health and care. How can technologies enhance our entire lives, especially for these user groups? Here are some dates of the past workshops and the prepared workshops. And the main topic of our slide is, of course, design for all. Products and services should be usable and accessible for most, ideally for all people. There is always the question, design for all is essential for 10% of the population, necessary for 40% of the population, and comfortable for 100%. And why should we disregard 40% of potential customers? A very quick overview about our dry run with students, where we tried to simulate disabilities and to ask them, can you experience the situation of persons with different disabilities, and can you imagine to design, to create, to co-create for this group? In the second or real first workshop, we had a lot of older persons around the table with a tendency that these are very wealthy and engaged persons who are active in the policies of older aged persons. It was a very surprising workshop, I reported earlier, and the result was that they want to continue, and we will do in the next months. Today, we are reporting about co-creation with visually impaired and blind people with the group of visually impaired amateur radio operators in Germany. A predecision was this group is very technical affine, and we know many of them from earlier tests we did for our labs outside the Living Innovation project. We expected 8 to 10 participants, but suddenly we had 16 around the table, which was very good and challenging, of course. We needed a location which is very reasonable for this group, and the duration was limited to 1 afternoon. Okay, first I have to explain myself. I belong to the group of this amateur radio operators since many years, and I'm also blind. And so I was very sure that this group will provide us with deep technical information, and some background of this group can be found on their website, which is on this slide. The preconditions of this workshop. Of course, first of all, we were very easy with the recruitment of the persons because this was done via the organization using their monthly audio magazine and, of course, the communication using amateur radio. The organization of the workshops in conjunction with the biannual meetings of this group was a trick because to join this meeting with the workshop, or the other way around, brings people to us from around Germany and even from France. And we had an environment which is very helpful for this group. It's a special hotel which is specialized for visually impaired and blind persons. The invitation to the workshop was rather easy, but we have to prepare all invitation materials as well as all workshop material in different media, especially as a DAISY book. Maybe you know what a DAISY book is or not. One sentence, you can imagine you are using MP3 files, and then DAISY book is something like joint MP3 files where you can jump from clause to clause, from chapter to chapter, or even from sentence to sentence. And we prepared all our materials in this way. To get the most out of such a workshop, it is very important to get in contact with the participants before the workshop. And Bianca and I, we already know this group since many years. And of course, we joined the previous evening meeting where people introduced themselves and had a beer. And we also were with them at the morning meeting where they did their internal meeting, because Bianca helped them with some administrative issues. So we had a very good pre-setting, knowing the people. So what is even more important for the successful workshop is, of course, to prepare the working material in an adequate way. Audio format, I already said this. We need the setup of the accessible location. That means tables in a clear structure. The moderators have to be in the middle of the group, not somewhere at the end. We had a clear briefing to our colleagues who assisted and also observed the meeting. That means we needed them to help in the process. And we, of course, had to adapt the co-creation methods to the needs of this group. For example, each of the participants got a label so that the assistants and we are able to address them directly by name. You cannot point to the person to say, oh, you can talk now. You need a personal addressing. But you also need addressing assistants with the management of refreshments, as well as with the process. That means if you are working in groups, you need somebody who takes notes and helps to take notes, because not all are able to read and write Braille. Not all are able to read or write large print. So you need this assistance. And so it was good. We were with 4 assisting people in this location. So each of the work groups had 1 assistant. And then we did an experiment. The experiment was to use Legos for creating user interfaces for visually impaired or blind persons. This is a little bit tricky and challenging. Maybe some of you know Lego scenes, which is used for co-creation or user experience workshops. But this does not work with this group. So Bianca and I went to a Lego shop and selected numerous Lego bricks which have some haptic experience. And these are used, and we will report later about this, to create a user interface which is perceived sensible and usable for blind and visually impaired persons.
So I will take over. To give you an overview of how we designed the workshop, you can see here the agenda. So first we started with some formalities among other things, we needed the declaration of consent from the participants. And then we divided the workshop in 3 practical parts. So these 3 parts are marked in the agenda as workshop 1, 2, and 3. So the first part, in the first part, the participants deal with visions, with a moment with visions and problems in the area of quality of life. In the second part, they deal with visions and problems in the area of health. And the third part was the design of an amateur radio transceiver. That was a part with Lego. Klaus-Peter already mentioned that before. And to conclude the workshop, we gave a short summary of the ideas. Okay, let's skip to the next slide. Yeah, I hope we can give you some impressions of the location first. All rooms and auto facilities are barrier-free, as Klaus-Peter mentioned already before, so it was a hotel. And as you can see in the photos, there are door signs with braille dots, handrails with room numbers, names in large print and braille. And of course, there is a guidance system for the blind on the floor, so blind people can find their way around independently. And on the lower left side, you can see the room where our workshop took place, and on the right side is the building. The next slide shows you some of the work materials we had. On the left side is a worksheet with, which is inscribed with braille as well as large print, and participants could sign the consent form on their own, or with some help of the assistants, of course. In the middle, you can see a foil, which we have also made available for group work. This is a foil where blind and visually impaired people can draw. That's possible by pressing down with a pen on a soft mat. You can see it in black, I think. It's, yeah, underneath. So the group members can also feel the design when someone draws something. The last picture shows the agenda in braille. And the next slide gives you an impression of the Lego. So on the left side are the group results we get, and on the right side are the material that we that were available. So on the top right, you can see that we pre-sorted a case with some small of the bricks, so the participant doesn't have to search for the bricks. Yeah, and I think Klaus-Peter, take over.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to play around with Legos, but that was the last part of the workshop. So we now want to present you some, we'll say, major outputs. These are only examples. We got extremely good output, and we even got output which is extremely technical. We got, for example, a complete or nearly complete layout for a user interface for a set-top box for an amateur radio station, and even that was a special task for the design of the user interface of a braille display. So that was a lot of fun. But now the major outputs from the workshop, which are not completely. The first very important issue, and I think this is a misunderstanding often outside the community of this group, the needs of blind persons are very different depending of age, training, the type of the reduced vision, and of course also the point of in time where you approach with disabilities. So a birth blind person has very different abilities and capabilities than a person who got who lost vision with 78 or something like that. So this is a very diverse group. The next point is already a very technical issue. It was the clear request to have a platform-independent, standardized speech output module for consumer products and household appliances. The idea was that not every device can include speech output, but each device should be able to have an interface to a special device which allows to read out the display or to read out the status of the device, um, um, so that it is easy to hear. Then there was a more social aspect that says that ICT-based communication is extremely valuable for this group, and this group is highly dependent. And this is a statement of people who do daily communication with amateur radio, but also with a lot of other media. But on the other side, we have the problem that new communication software suddenly appears on the market, which is no longer accessible, and you are excluded from a group which decided to use this technology, this application, or what else. And sometimes you even approach the situation that you will get a software update, and suddenly it is not longer workable for you on your iPhone or smartphone. And next remark was very important. That's meanwhile a lot of smart TVs provide text to speech and text input. That means command recognition. But the providers of these devices are a little bit arrogant because they say, oh, we only need support for some basic functions, but not for complicated functions. The clear request is that all functions shall be accessible via speech output and speech input, and not only a few ones. The next problem are often the manuals of devices. Even they are available in electronic formats, they are not accessible. And if they are accessible, they are using a lot of visual information to explain how to use the device. And you seldomly find in this documentation information about the accessibility features of a device. For example, have a look at your washing machine manual and figure out how to activate signal tones. Sometimes you even don't find them. The next very clear demand was on DAB radios. At the moment, there is no digital radio on the market which provides complete access for blind users. And therefore, there was the request for that manufacturers shall be responsible for the accessibility of mainstream products, household appliances. And there was even, again, the request, do we need regulation in this field? Then there was a very funny suggestion I never expected. It was the request to have a digital camera which has voice guidance to make good photos, which would help hopefully everybody, but of course, especially persons with visual impairments. And the interesting thing was that in principle, such a guidance is already available in some of the in some applications for the mobile phone. For example, if you are using the software application Seeing AI, it gives you guidance. Turn the device in this direction. The picture is incomplete. There is only one smiling face. Somebody looking angry or sad, and so on. So there is already such knowledge, such technique available, but not implemented in a digital camera today. Especially in the field of e-business, people want to have more textual description of products and services. For example, it does not fit if it says on the web, this is a gray jacket. You also want to know what is the type of material and how many pockets and where are they located. So there was the request to have detailed textual information on websites and not only pictures. On the other side, often information is too much. And there was a clear request, if you provide information for this group, and not only for this group, use profiles. For example, if you are using a navigation system, it tells you everything from the waste paper basket to the post box to don't know what. But if you are familiar with the way and you only want to find the way, you don't want to have all this information. So you need a profile saying only the basic information or only the daily information, not too much information. And there was a provocation. We are using artificial intelligence for autonomous vehicles. Why don't we use the technology for blind pedestrians? Because the navigation systems for blind are making progress, but are far away from a very high quality. Then there was the note that fitness applications, for example, this fitness rings or fitness watches are not very familiar in this group because they are not really accessible. The solutions are not known by this group at this moment. And then there is a very sad story. Accessibility seems to be not at hospitals or at medical practice. There is no barrier-free material for patient information. The caregivers are not aware of the situation of blind or visually impaired persons. We had one participant who said that he knows somebody. They think he has Alzheimer, but indeed he has only low vision and bad hearing. So there are a lot of problems in this field of caregiving patients, hospitals, and that's, I think, a frustration and a very, very bad situation. Yeah, these are some, we'll say, major highlights. We got a lot of more, and as I said, we got really very detailed technical specifications which we cannot present here in this time frame. For those who are interested a little bit more in the workshops and the participants of this workshop, we have available a video interview with Christoph in English language, who a little bit explains more the situation from his point of view. And the link to this video was in the invitation of this webinar, and I think we'll repeat it in a few minutes again. What are the results of the workshop? How will things go on? We will continue. We will continue to work together and are still are already continuing to work together with some of the interested participants. This is a communication starting at a mail level or in a, we'll say, informal level using Skype. This group seems to have problems to use the virtual communication platform due to accessibility problems, but also due problems to understand new system which they don't know yet. We will continue with follow-up interviews because we have a lot of questions on some of the proposals, and we will continue with this group, especially on this amateur radio issue, because the industry supporting amateur radio stations or amateur radio operators is well used to support blind and visually amateur radio operators. And we already made some connections to at least one of these providers, and we will present this company the outputs of our workshops. But of course, this output has to be a little bit refined to be presented to the company, in this case in Japan, a Japanese company. And we will present this specific output at an exhibition in June next year, which takes place at the amateur radio exhibition in Germany. What is the next step for our upcoming workshops? In our next workshops, we will address again visually and blind persons, but not technic-affine persons. And we have a second planned workshop, which is a real challenge, because together with a cooperation partner Lebenshilfe in Hamburg, we will try a workshop with persons with some mental problems, with learning problems. And we want to know how co-creation could work with this unexpected large group. So this is a quick go through what we did. For us, it was a very unexpected workshop because the very intensive approach and communication with people, which even continued after the workshop at the beer at the evening. Yeah.
And if you have any further questions we cannot answer today, feel free to contact us.
That's clear. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Klaus and Bianca, for your presentations. We now have 10 minutes time for a Q&A with the attendees. So please ask your question using the chat box. Let's start with one of the first questions that we received. Klaus, what are the top 3 recommendations that you would give to somebody who plans a co-creation workshop with visually impaired and blind persons?
First of all, be open to the people and ask what type of help do you need. And the second is you need to prepare the material in a proper way. I talked about the DAISY book, but we also used, and this may be strange a little bit for some listeners, we also used the Beamer to provide those with information who have some remaining vision. And we even used a video, which was very funny. And sometimes Bianca stopped this video and gave some more explanation because the density of information was so high, you cannot do it as an audio description. You need a proper location and, of course, a good mood of people. So we introduced, first of all, after the beginning of the pre-event, what's the English word? The personal approach by first name. And that gives a very nice experience and a nice situation.
Thank you. Another question that came up. How do you find companies for implementing the outcomes?
Oh, that was a question was put on the table. I would say it was the first question we got out of the workshop. That's a very tricky issue because we have always a discussion is design for all a strategy for a company, and we have some companies who have the strategies already established. We have some companies which need help to establish this approach, and we have also companies which ignore still this market challenge or this market opportunity. And you may know I'm networking a lot with a lot of companies in Europe, in so-called industry associations. And I think we are on a way where things are changing. But I also, as a self-affected person, that the people often ask, do we need regulation in this field? And just in 3 months ago, we got new regulation in Europe where some products and services need to be accessible by regulation within the next 3 to 6 years. And this covers smart devices like smart TVs and smart telephones, but also the electronic business for the private sector.
Thank you. A little bit related to this first question, but more about your own company. How you mentioned it a little bit in the presentation, but how are you going to feedback the results of the workshops, actually of all the workshops, to your company, to Siemens, and what are the next steps in this regard?
The situation of Siemens is a little bit tricky because we are not so in direct contact with end customers or consumers, but our customers are in this situation. So we are a little bit like a multiplier where we help our customers to help their end customers. And this is a little bit unusual situation, but I think it's a very effective situation because the impact of some activities is much higher because of this multiplier function. That brings us into the position to give our advice, to help our customers, but we are not responsible for the results. So sometimes we have made the experience, oh, they listen very well to us and follow our guidance and our tests on the implementation. And sometimes the frustration is high where persons say in the last moment, oh, this feature, it's too expensive or don't know. So yes, our interest is first of all to help our customers, and second, to use this knowledge in the ongoing standardization on accessibility.
Great. Back to the workshop. What were the most surprising results for you in this last workshop?
First, the extremely high engagement over all the 4 hours time of all people. And okay, this is a very personal view. I think the idea to use Legos for blind and visually impaired persons is a very interesting idea. And we had not enough time to explore this opportunity in detail. So it would be very interesting to make a simple workshop only with Legos, with one very specific topic to test this method more in detail. So that is something I want to test out, hopefully in the runtime of the Living project.
And regarding that last workshop too, what are definite no-goes for you when co-creating with this user group, so with blind and visually impaired persons?
Yeah, no-goes. A very important issue is that you need respect to the users. Even they are complicated in behavior or in meaning, you have to respect the disability and how to address this person. To give you one example, it's a type of, it's perceived as arrogant when you show slides to this group and say, oh, on the top you see this, and I marked in red this important information and so on. You sometimes need to adapt a little bit to the needs and to the language, but you have not to adapt to a specific language for this group. To give you an example, what's no-go? if you say goodbye, you can really say see you later, but you need not to say hear you later or shake hands later or to find another silly explanation. Use the normal language, but when describing the issues, try to be as verbal as possible.
Great. Thank you so much, Klaus, Peter, and Bianca, for your presentation, and to the participants. So before we say goodbye and before we wrap up, if you are interested in inclusive ICT, we would like to invite you to take part in our joint action, develop a framework for inclusive ICT innovations. The overall idea of the joint action is to explore ways of including the needs of groups such as older persons, people with disabilities, or underprivileged social groups into ICT applications. As this joint action is taking place within the Live-In project, this means that we are not starting from scratch, but we are building upon experiences already achieved with incorporating inclusive topics within the Live-In co-creation workshops, just like those that we just learned about with Klaus, Peter, and Bianca. So whom do we invite to engage in this joint action? So on the one hand, experts focusing on empowerment, participation, and inclusive methods. And on the other hand, we also invite companies with customers with special needs or companies that want to improve the accessibility and usability of their products and services. Beyond these two groups, of course, everyone interested in inclusive innovations is welcome to join and contribute. So regarding the aim of this joint action, we suggest developing a guideline of how to perform inclusive innovation. And this guideline should consist of key elements, methods, and practical requirements to provide practitioners with a framework for effectively considering inclusion in innovation processes. I hope that this brief introduction raised your interest, and if so, we warmly invite you to take part in this joint action and to share your experiences with us. You can do so by registering on our Living platform under the link www.living-innovation.net. So thanks a lot, everyone, one more time. Our team will be reaching out in the next weeks with follow-up information about the webinar, as well as the recording of the webinar and the link to the video that Klaus Peter mentioned earlier. And you can always visit us on our website. So thank you again for joining us today, and I hope you have a nice afternoon. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from the Siemens team.